Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Lambda School's mini bootcamp course. My name, again, is Dan Frainer. I will be the instructor for this course. If you're just joining us, we are on lesson 3, but not to fret. Both the first 2 lessons are recorded and are available on our YouTube channel. But this is lesson 3 of a 12 lesson course. So this is still week 1. We're still in the early stages of this course. It will last for 3 weeks. And those of you that are just joining us, this course is kind of go over kind of all the basic tools that a professional web developer uses in their everyday work. We're going to talk about HTML. We're going to talk about CSS. We're going to go pretty heavy in JavaScript. And then we're going to put them all together in our last lesson and build a fully functioning web application. It's really awesome to be able to provide this course to everyone out there free of charge. And I really am excited about being able to teach this course and kind of give you a glimpse into what it takes to be a web developer. This is, as I said, just kind of the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the tools that a professional web developer uses, professional software developer uses, and this is actually the tip of the iceberg, essentially. And so, we just kind of want to give you an introduction, get you started, and, get you excited about this stuff. It is exciting. If you love building stuff, if you love problem solving, you want to create things, this is a great place to be and to learn how to do all that. This is kind of a precursor to our much more immense, full Academy of Computer Sciences course that we offer here at Lambda School. So the mini bootcamp is, as I said, 100% free of charge. Anyone is able to join us, to go through, to work on the assignments, to do the curriculum, to get live help from our amazing TAs and myself when I'm available to give help. And we have a lot of great students that have taken this course before and that are involved in our full Academy of Computer Sciences course that provide help in our Slack channel. But as I said, this is kind of a precursor in a lot of ways to our full course. And our full course is a 6-month full-time computer science immersive. It's called Lambda School Academy of Computer Science. And it is 6 months, and you start off essentially where we end this mini boot camp. You'll start there and spend the next 6 months just deep diving into software engineering and computer science concepts. And by the time you've finished, you're fully ready to join the workforce and be a professional software engineer. And that is our goal for you. And we do that through, we are incentivized to make you a professional software engineer through our unique tuition plan, which is you pay nothing up front. You get 100% free to start, no deposit, no tuition at all. It's just you, your computer, and your willingness and eagerness to learn and to put in the work. And our side of the bargain is that we are going to stay on top of relevant technologies. We're going to stay on top of what companies are hiring for, and we are going to make you a software engineer. And by the time you're done, you will be job ready, and you'll go out and get a job in the field. And then that's where the tuition part comes in. So we have this unique thing where you don't have to pay a single dime until you get a job. And then we ask for 17% of your yearly income over $50,000 a year for 2 years. And that's only if you get a job in the software industry. So it's pretty cool. I kind of wanted to take a minute to kind of give you an overview of what a day in the life of a Lambda School student is, to kind of show you a quick glimpse into kind of how we operate at Lambda School. We are 100% online and remote, and that allows us to reach the greatest audience we can. We don't want there to be any barriers to learning this other than your willingness to learn and your eagerness to put in the work. So that's it. As long as you have an internet connection and a computer, and we can serve you from anywhere. And so it's 100% online. Our students are distributed from the East Coast to the West Coast of the United States. We do have some international students as well, and we do have an international student pilot program. But most of our students are based in the U.S. But we're still, at Lambda School, we operate on Pacific Standard Time. So we operate from 8 a.m. To 5 p.m. Pacific. And the first thing you hop in to your Slack group. Your cohort has its own Slack group. You start chatting with the other students. 8 o'clock rolls around, and you're presented with a daily coding challenge. It's a chance for you to get warmed up, to flex your coding muscles, and really just get started with the day. Right after that, we have a solution lecture for the coding challenge, and then you go right into lectures with our instructors. They're going to teach you a new concept or show students how to perform a specific programming task. And we're going to really spend a lot of time just kind of hammering these concepts in. And then you have lunch, quick lunch break, or it's an hour, excuse me, not quick. And then after lunch, you hop in and we do pair programming here at Lambda School. So you'll hop in with another student and you're both given a lab or an assignment to work on. And you crunch on it for the entire afternoon. And depending on how quick or how you finish the assignment, the assignment can last all afternoon. There's a quick live question and answer session in the afternoon for any questions you might have with the instructor or with the TA, or concepts people are struggling with, or an instructor gives a deeper dive into the concepts you were talking about. And then we wrap up the day with a final check-in with your project manager and your project work. And that's our day. And that's 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and that lasts 6 months. So it's you're fully immersed in this culture and in learning this stuff. We do have world-class instructors, and we also have amazing TAs or PMs, as we call them. And we have a 1 to 8 student to PM ratio. So there's always someone to reach out to. There's always someone to help out. There's always someone to ask a question to. So you're never left in the dark with any of that stuff. And that's kind of just a general overview of how our day goes at Lambda School. How our night is going to go tonight is we're going to continue with our mini bootcamp course. And so, like I said, today is lesson 3. And this is, we're going to continue going down the CSS route. And we're going to talk about some cool abilities to position elements on the screen with CSS. Let me share my screen and cool. So here is our GitHub repository. So this is lesson 3. So those of you that are following along, you can hop into the lesson 3 CSS positioning folder here, and then you'll see all of our class notes for today. So today we're going to go over an introduction to positioning. Positioning in CSS is really cool, really powerful. We're going to talk about the display property, the position property. We're going to use the position property to position elements. And then we're going to talk real quick about a new kind of feature of CSS called Flexbox. So real quick before we start, let's get a little kind of retrospective on what we did yesterday. Yesterday, we learned about HTML and CSS. We learned about all the different HTML elements. This is a paragraph. And we learned what their use case was, right? This is a container. So we learned about the different HTML elements and their use case, and we've started to talk about CSS and the different properties that we can give our elements to style them, the different ways we can select them, right? So we can give this a class of span class. We'll give this an ID of div ID. And so we can select either all of the elements of a single type using just the element name and nothing else. And then we can write the rules that we want to change the element style in. So we'll just use color on the paragraph tag. And remember, color as a standalone word only affects the text color. So we can say red, and we'll see, there we go. This is a paragraph, that paragraph tag, the red color turned red. Let's go. Now let's talk about how we select a class. We select a class using a period or just a dot and the name of the class. That's going to go and select every single element that has this class. Remember, IDs are only on one element. We like to think of IDs as like a driver's license number or a social security number. Only one person has that driver's license number or social security number. Only one element has that ID. Okay. Whereas a class, there can be, one or hundreds or thousands of students in a single class, right? So a class is inclusive of every element that has that class. So just remember that class can be on multiple elements. ID can only be on one element. So when we ask CSS to select that class, it's going to select all elements of that class. And we can say something like font size is 40 pixels. And now we can see that span class went up to 40 pixels. And now let's go to select an ID. We use the hash, the pound sign, and we give it the name of the ID, just like our class. And we can say something like background red. And there we go. Now we see that we can select elements on the page, and we can select elements on the page, and we can change the style of those elements on that page. I'm going to move this real quick. Cool. So that's kind of an overview of what we did yesterday. We learned the basic makeups of an HTML of a website, and then we learned how to select elements and start adding style to them. Today, we're going to learn about positioning in CSS. So building a layout and making everything look clean is what most people are looking to do when they start learning CSS. You want to create this great layout of your web page. You want it to look good. You want it to give it some great style. And that's what we're all seeking to do when we learn CSS. Positioning HTML elements on a page is probably one of the most powerful abilities of CSS, but it also can be one of the most frustrating. In this lesson, we're going to learn a few different ways to position items on the page. I want to preface this lesson by saying that these concepts are difficult. CSS and learning these concepts is difficult. This is merely meant to be kind of a first pass, right? This is meant to be an introduction to these concepts. We do not expect you to master these concepts by the end of this lesson. It takes people years to master these concepts. So we just want to introduce you to them so that when you are building a website or you're using CSS in the future and you say, I want that headline to be all the way on the right side of the page. How do I get it there? Do I add a bunch of spaces in front of it? It's like, is that how we do it? And you'll see that doesn't work. And you'll see oh, I remember that CSS positioning. So let me go look into those ideas that were displayed there. So if this is very difficult for you, which it probably will be, don't fret. Just keep working with it, keep playing with it. And that's what CSS is really all about, is just kind of playing with the stuff until you get an idea of what's happening and how it works and how to use it, right? So I just want you to keep that in mind as we go through today. So I'm going to delete all of this stuff and we're going to start fresh. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the display property. It's one of the most important CSS properties for positioning. We can use the display property to control how the elements are displayed in relation to the elements around them, how they display, how they behave on the screen. And it's really the beginning, the starting point of what we use to start moving elements around the screen. So first things first, um, every single HTML element has kind of their own set of like built-in style rules, and display is definitely one of them. There are two types of elements in an HTML page. So we remember our paragraph tag, and you remember what we talked about, a paragraph. How a paragraph tag will always start on a new line, right? The paragraph tag will never go, if I do this, it's not going to put that other one next to it. It's always going to start on a new line. Okay, so there are two types of display elements that are default in HTML. There's a block and there's an inline element. So the first one we're going to talk about is a block element, which is what a paragraph tag is. Kind of the signature characteristics of a block element are that they take up the entire width of the container that they're in, and they always start on a new line. So just remember that a block element takes up the maximum width that it can, and it always starts on a new line. And I've kind of given away a little clue here of what a single block element is, but it's a paragraph tag. It's a block element. It always starts on a new line, and even though we can't see it right now, it's taking up the entire width. So let's actually, I love to add borders to our elements so that we can see what we're talking about. So let's add a border of let's go 3px solid blue. And look at that. See that this paragraph tag, even though it only has this much text, is taking up the entire width of the line of the container there. And the container is the body, right? Because the body is what's holding these p tags essentially. I'm not showing it in CodePen here, but essentially this is what's happening, right? So our body is holding these paragraph tags. CodePen allows us to just write straight to our body, but that's what's happening, okay? Just want to make that clear for everyone. That's like, oh, he doesn't have any HTML or body tags or anything on there. What's going on? Can I just write it like this? No, this is CodePen allows us to do it just like this. But back to our lesson, the paragraph tag is a block element. It's a block element. Block elements take up the maximum width, and they always start at a new line. What's the opposite of a block element is an inline element. And we have already seen that spans will only take up as much space as they need to display the data that we've given it, right? So it only takes up as much space as it needs, and it doesn't necessarily start a new line. It could, if you are all the way at the edge of the screen here and you add another span, it'll start on a new line, but that's not a characteristic of it. So it's the opposite of a block element, and we can see that by doing this. And we can see there that this in blue is a block, and it is taking up the entire width, and it's always starting a new line. In red is an inline element, and it only takes up as much space. Look at it. If we just did a T, that would only take up enough space to show that element, to show that data, and that's it. And it doesn't start on a new line automatically. So what's cool about CSS, we know that these elements naturally by default have certain display properties to them. P's are always going to be a block. Spans are always going to be an inline element. And it really, as you go and as you learn HTML, it's going to take some learning to figure out which elements are blocks and which elements are spans. I always say, if you don't know, just throw a border around it and see what it does. If it takes up the entire width, that's a block. If it doesn't, it's a span. And then you can play with it from there. So say we wanted to turn this P element, both these P elements, into inline elements. We have the ability to do that. We have the ability to change what the display is of that element. And we'd use it using the display property. And the display, and we can simply say, we know that P is a block naturally, so we can just say inline. Now look at that. It just took both of our paragraph elements and it created inline elements out of them. Now naturally there's some a little bit of padding that goes around them just from the code pen. We can erase that if we wanted to, but you'll notice that it is no longer taking up the entire line. It's only taking up as much space as it needs to display the data given it to it. And we can do the same for inline elements. We can change them to blocks. Now we see that it's taking up the entire width of the container. These are spans, right? Spans are supposed to be inline. There's just a T there. It's only supposed to take up that much space. But now that we've changed the display to block, it takes up the entire width of the container here. Okay, and you're not always going to have borders around it. It's not always going to be apparent. If we remove that border, we can see that, oh, well, is that a block or a span or an inline element? That's why I like to add borders to it so you can visualize it. So we can use the display property to change the default behavior of these HTML elements. There's a couple of different, a couple of other display properties that we can set to it. First of all is the display of none. And you'll notice that display of none removes the item from the page. And so we can actually remove elements off the page using display of none. Let's do that for the paragraphs. We've totally removed those items. There is a little bit of confusion with display of none and a CSS property called visibility, and we can set that to hidden. And let's look at the difference between display of none and visibility hidden. So let's go. Let's see what happens when we go display of none on those paragraphs. They totally are removed from the page. There's no sign that they were ever there, right? They're gone. There's no space where they used to be. There's nothing. They're removed from the page. So let's look at visibility hidden. Visibility hidden actually just hides the element. It's still there. We just can't see it. And the space that it took up is still there. I just wanted to point that out. And that's kind of an aside to this conversation today. But there's a difference between display none and visibility hidden. The other display property I'm going to talk about is display of flex. And display of flex we're going to be talking about at the end of the lesson today. There's a couple more, but those are the ones that we're going to focus on today. Cool. So let me do some quick work. Okay. So let's go. Let's select the parent class, and we're going to give this div a width of 400 pixels and a height of 400 pixels and a border of 5 pixels solid purple. Okay, so that's our parent, right? So now inside of that, we have a child, which is another div, which is nested inside of this parent. Okay, we can select that and say the same exact thing, but we're going to change them around a little bit. We're going to do 100 by 100. Well, let's say this is green. Oh, it doesn't, not contrasting enough. Orange. Okay, great. So now we're going to talk about the position property. Now that we know about the display property and the difference between a block and an inline element, we're going to talk about the position property. So every single element by default has a position property on it. And this one's a lot easier than the display property, which can be one of two. Every single element has the position of static naturally. Okay. So that's our first position property, is static. Static just means do what you normally do, right? It just means, okay, you're fine. Just be an element. That's your natural state. So there's never going to be a time when we're going to specifically set a position to static. It just doesn't really happen until you're much more advanced and are using JavaScript in it. We just don't set anything to static because that's just what it is, right? And it doesn't help us in any way. There's three other position properties that we're going to talk about that allow us to move items around the screen. And it's really cool. This is where things can start to get a little bit complicated, though. So just keep that in mind, that this is an introduction to this stuff, and not, you're not expected to master this stuff. So the first of the second position property I want to talk about is a position called relative. And you'll notice that nothing happened, right? And that's on the parent, so that's on the purple box. And relative, what it says, it tells the browser, I want you to treat this exactly as you would if it were static, with the ability to add properties that allow us to move the element around the screen. So be relative, be exactly what you would normally do, and you're going to move the item relative to the screen. Okay, so this allows us to use some really cool CSS positioning styling properties called top, bottom, left, and right. Okay, I'll just actually go into it. This is going to move the element a certain amount of pixels away from whatever one you picked, right? So if we had top and we had 100 pixels here, imagine the top of your screen is 0, the left of your screen is 0, the bottom of your screen is bottom 0, the right of your screen is right 0. Okay, and when you give it a property here, it's going to move the element that distance from the top, from the bottom, from the left, from the right. So if I say 100 pixels here, we should expect this purple element to move away from the top by 100 pixels. So we should see it's right about here. Okay. There we go. And now we've moved it, right? Now it's, we're able to move it around the screen. Let's go left 300 pixels. Look at that. We just moved it 300 pixels away from the left side. Okay. So 100 pixels away from the top, 300 pixels away from the left. And that's only, and I'm going to change that to 100 so we can see it a little bit better. It's only because we gave this element the position of relative. If this was static, nothing changes. We can't do them, right? But we can change it to relative, and we can use these top, bottom, left, right properties on it. So I want to go on to the next position property, which is a position of fixed. And fixed, you can't see here, but yet is so some P stuff. Fixed is going to take the element and kind of pull it off the page and put it on a space on the screen that it's going to stay on your screen. It's going to stay fixed to that location. So let's do this. It's going to add a whole bunch of paragraph tags in here. Okay, so now it'll scroll. So when I scroll, notice that this element is not going to move. It's in a fixed location on the screen. Look at that. So let's think of some practical uses for fixed. Think of like a menu bar, a header on something. If you go to a website and there's always, facebook.com is right up here and your whole thing is there, right? That's a fixed element on the screen. It's not going to move. So that's fixed. And we can also, give it top left, bottom right properties to it. As long as it's not static, we can give it those properties. And also notice how it kind of pulls the element off the screen so the other elements take its place. It's like it's not there. It's kind of on this pane in front of everything else. Okay. The last element we're going to talk about, or the last position property we're going to talk about, is absolute. And absolute is a tricky one. It's going to go on the child element, and it can only go on a child element if its parent has a position other than static. So it has to have a position other than static, and then you can put absolute on the child element. So let's go position absolute. Now I can give this top 100 pixels, left 100 pixels, and it's going to stay in this position according to its parent element. So if I change this top one from relative, and we'll go top 75 pixels, let's do right 100 pixels. Oop, that's a little different. Notice now that child is staying absolute to its parent element, to whatever the nearest element is. If I did not have this position relative on it, the nearest parent element would be the screen up here, and we'd see that move. And it moved back to where it was because that's what it did. Let's change this to 500. All right, so now it's not in that element anymore. It's on the screen. So it has to have a parent of something other than static. And now it's going to be relative to its parent. There we go. Boom. Cool. So those are the 4 position properties that we'll use. Static, which is our default. Relative, which is just position it according to its nearest relative, and the way treat it like it would if it was static, but give us access to these top left, bottom right properties. Fixed, which adheres the element to a fixed position on the screen, and it kind of pulls the element off the screen. And then absolute, which will position the element relative to its nearest positioned element. So if its parent has a position of relative, if it doesn't, then it's going to go to the next one up, and blah blah blah, and all the way up till body. And then if it hits body, then it's going to be relative to the body. Okay, so those are the 4 kind of main position properties we're going to talk about today. So all of this is great. We can kind of position it according to the place on the screen we want it to be. But what happens if we position it 100 pixels from the top and our screen is a lot smaller than this page? Or what if we want to position it in the center, or things like that? The old way of doing it, the old way of like centering items or making items even width apart was really difficult. It was really hard, especially when you were trying to spread them apart evenly. And So you might have an 11-inch MacBook, or you might have, a 40-inch monitor. You might have an iPhone SE, which is a really small screen. As a developer, you had to um, take all of these things into account, and you had to write code that went pixel by pixel for each of these screens, until we were introduced to a concept called Flexbox. Flexbox is a new concept in CSS, and it allows us to position our elements in relation to its parent and each other, and it does all the math and does all the hard work for us. No more, we used to have to do like weird CSS hacks. Like if we wanted to position something in the middle of the screen, we had to do margin left auto, margin right auto, and then that would work. And then what if we wanted to do it vertically? Then we'd have to, figure something else out. We don't have to do that anymore. And I'm actually going to add a couple of divs in here. And I'm going to remove those positions from it. And I'm going to do it. Bear with me for one moment while I set this up. Cool. And so we were introduced to Flexbox. And so remember when I had talked about the other display property, one of them being none and the other one being flex. Flexbox allows us to set the display of flex on an element itself, and then set rules for the children elements inside of it. Flexbox can be a really difficult topic and a really difficult subject, but when you get the hang of it, it's just really, really fun and easy to use. And so I'm going to kind of go over it a little bit, but definitely this is, a primer. This is an introduction to these concepts, and don't worry if this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you at first. So first thing I want to show is that we set the display of flex on the parent element. And all of the rules we're going to give it are going to affect the children in that parent. Okay. Second thing I'm going to say is that when we create a flex box, we're essentially creating two axes. We are creating a left to right axis, which is our main axis, and we're creating a top to bottom, which is our cross axis. And I'll go over what those mean right now. But when we set those left to right, that's the way that our elements are going to be positioned on the screen. So you'll see when I set this to flex that they're going to boop, display. Helps if you spell things right. And there we go. So now we see that all of the elements are aligned on our main axis here. Okay. And not on the cross axis, but we'll go over that in just a moment on what that means. So now we have a flex box. This purple box, the parent, is a flex box with a main axis of going left to right, a cross axis going top to bottom. Now we can affect the elements on that main and cross axis by using a couple of different properties. First, the one that affects the main axis is called justify content. The one that affects the cross axis is called align items. And you'll say like, well, why didn't they just name this main axis and cross axis? Well, we gave it the name main axis and cross axis afterwards. But justify content and align items are what they're called. And so let's go in axis, no matter what, right? We're going to say cross axis. So, and let me also this for just a moment. So now that we have access to aligning the items along the axes, we can start adding rules to them. So justify content, and let's just give it something called center. Now all of our elements are centered along that main axis. And I'm actually going to make this a little bit bigger. We can see. And no matter how big this gets, it's still centered, right? No matter how small it gets, 610. Oh, that's way bigger than I wanted it to be. We could have done 310. Want a little bit of space around them. There we go. They're still centered, right? And so that's really cool to be able to center things. We can also do a lot more stuff than just centering it. We have access to something called Flex Start. And Flex Start is going to be our default property, right? So that's where they should be if nothing has been affected. We also have, as you might have guessed it, Flex End. Now it's going to move all of those items to the opposite side of that axis, to the very farthest reaches of that axis that it can. And this is where things start to get really cool. We have access to properties that will spread the elements out however we want. So let's say space between. Look at that. It just spread our elements out perfectly with the exact amount of space between them. And if we had 4, 6, 8, however many elements we had here, they would all be spread out perfectly evenly. Okay? And no matter how big that container is, they're always going to be even. This was a really difficult thing to do before Flexbox, especially for screens that grew and shrunk with size. But now we see that it just does all the math perfectly for us, and we no longer have to worry about how to space them out. Say you want to do space between, but you want to have there to be an exact amount of padding on each side of these left and right, right? So you want, however much that it is, say it's 15 pixels. You want to do 15, 15, 15, 15, etc. But it's going to change. We just want them to be evenly spaced. We can say space around. Now it's going to put padding on that axis on the left and the right, or if it's top and bottom, if it's a flipped axis. But now it's space around. And we also have, I believe, evenly. There we go. Space evenly is now going to put the same amount of space in between. So the left, in between them, and the right, it's all going to be the same amount of space. It's really cool to be able to move these elements around like this and position them really quickly like this. So those are all available on Justify Content, which is our main axis. Remember, Justify Content is always the main axis. We also have Align Items, which is our cross axis. And Align Items, we can do Flex Start, Flex End, and Center on it. So let's just go center. And look at that. We just vertically centered those 3 elements in our container, and we evenly spaced them out. That's amazing with 3 lines of code, essentially. We've done all of that. Okay, so Align Items, remember, has Flex Start, Flex End, and Center. Flex End. Now we can put them all the way at the bottom, and we can, mix these up however we want. We want them in the bottom right-hand corner all smushed up together. Easy. It's simple for us to do now. We can start moving our elements around the screen and start positioning them where we want, exactly where we want. Okay. So here's where things are going to get a little trickier now. We remember that when we start a Flexbox, we have a main axis that goes from left to right and a cross axis that goes from top to bottom. This is known as row, right? So our main axis is in a row. So it's going from left to right. Okay. We can change that by using flex direction. And just to show, row is what we normally have. We can do it with our main axis going from right to left. Easy, we just say reverse. Now it's going to flip all of the elements around and start them from the right and move them to the left in the order that they're in. We also have the ability to switch the main axis from left to right to top to bottom. So we can flip the main and the cross axis by using column. And now we see that now we see that our main axis is going from top to bottom. And remember, justify content always affects the main axis. It never affects the cross axis. So you're not moving what justifying content affects, you're moving the axes themselves. So we can go space. Now we can, center, and we can do this as we want. And we can also have column reverse. So Flexbox, it can get pretty tricky, and it's going to take a lot of practice, which is, the assignment tonight is essentially practicing all this stuff, moving things around the screen. And, it just takes a lot of practice. And once again, this is not meant to be a watch this video or watch this lecture once and get it right away. This is meant to be a starting point and meant to, kind of show you the direction of the way you can go and allow you to start, saying like, oh man, I want to, center this vertically. How do I do that? You can use Flexbox to center things vertically. I want to, I don't want this paragraph tag taking up the entire width of this page. Well, you can change it to an inline element. A lot of stuff you can move around and change in CSS. And it takes a lot of working on, and it takes a lot of getting used to. The one last thing I want to show you is one last Flexbox thing. But first I want to reiterate that all of these Flexbox rules we've been talking about have always been on the parent. Always been, all of these rules have been on the parent container, which is that purple container, right? None of them have been on those children elements. There's one rule that I'm going to show you right now that allows you to, and I'm going to get rid of that flex direction so we can talk about it. Remember, our align items is on our default setup is top to bottom. So we can use something called align self on the item itself, and we can move it on the align items axis, the cross axis. So let's say we want to do flex end. There are a couple other options we can put on the children elements themselves, but this is the one that's used the most often. And this one's kind of important. And so you can use it to move it along that cross axis wherever you want. That one single element, okay? And so just note, there is no such thing called justify self. So you are not able to move a single element along the main axis wherever you want. You can move it along the cross axis wherever you want, but you cannot move it along the main axis wherever you want. So if you're saying like, oh, I wish this child was at the very beginning and these two were at the very end, you just can't do that unless you flip the direction around and you mess with a whole bunch of stuff. So that's it for tonight. The assignment is essentially going to be opening up. Let's go into our pre-course folder. We find lesson 3 and we get into our homework and we open up our homework.html file. And you'll see now in here, these are where all of our instructions are. to start moving things around this page. Move this tiger into that red box. Um, move this header up to the top and flip them around. Um, and here's an exercise where you just, playing around with Flexbox and getting these items to move around the screen as you want. So it's a fun assignment. It's going to get you playing around with these CSS properties. Um, and you're going to do all of your homework inside of the homework.css file, okay, in your text editor, and then come over here, refresh it to see the changes that you've made, okay? And that's going to be the homework assignment for tonight. So let's get some questions in the questions channel. If you have any questions, please post them in the questions channel. And I got a few minutes left in the evening. I can answer any questions you guys have. I see some typing, so I'll give everyone a couple minutes. What is the purpose of display none? That's a great question. You're thinking, why would I ever want to, I've created this. Why would I ever want to remove it from the page using CSS? Right now, there is no reason to, right? There is no reason to use the display none. You just delete it off your HTML. But when we start using JavaScript with our HTML and CSS, and especially on lesson 12, we're gonna see where display none comes in. What happens if you want to, click an item and it removes it from the page? That's where display none comes in. Is going to be in user interactions and the ability to get items to appear and disappear and reappear on the page. So it's really cool, but that's a little precursor to, or a little foreshadowing to what we're going to do in lesson 12. But for right now, there's no reason to use display none. If you are on Chrome, you have a file tab. I don't know where it is on Windows. There is a file somewhere on your Chrome. It might be in your might be in the menu drop down, but there is a file tab somewhere on Chrome. If you're on Windows, if you're on Mac, it's just at the top of the screen. Oh, if you're on Mac, it's at the very top of the screen. You'll see the Chrome will be right there, and then the file tab will be right there. Could you explain more what you said about child and parent interactions on the screen in the last part of the lecture? I'm not sure. Are you talking about with Flexbox? So when we have a parent, the parent is going to be wrapping all of our children, right? So that's our parent element. And inside of that parent are all of our children. Flexbox, when we put display flex and justify content and align items and flex direction, all of those rules go on the parent. And those rules affect the children, but they don't go on the children themselves. They go on the parent, and it's how the children interact with each other in the page or in the element, okay? So just keep that in mind when you're playing around with it. Flexbox is going to be something that you have to play around with. But just remember, if you're putting align items on the child element itself, that's wrong. You have to put that stuff on the parent. No, that's fine. Any element can be a flexbox. So these children can be their own flexboxes. And we can, center these elements in here inside of these children, no matter where they are. But for right now, we're going to focus on just one parent being a flexbox and the children inside of it being children. Cool. Well, that's going to do it for us tonight, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. And I know this is a difficult lesson, and I know that this subject matter is really hard to really absorb. But like I said, this is going to be something that you just have to play around with a lot. And like I said, this is not something that anyone expects you to fully get. Right? If you are joining us for the full course, we go back into this and we go really in depth, and we get a really good understanding of all this stuff. But this is a great introduction to it, and you're going to be that much more prepared when you see it again, or when you feel like you need to move something around, and you're like, well, I know we can move things around now, right? I just have to do a little research and go back in the class notes and look at it. Have fun with the assignment. It is a lot of fun. CSS and positioning, it can be frustrating, but it can also be a lot of fun when you get it to work right. It is fun stuff. Tomorrow night, we're going to start on our first real computer programming language, which is JavaScript. And we're going to start going into JavaScript. And for the next 8 lessons, we're going to be in JavaScript land. So prepare for JavaScript. It's so much fun, but have fun working on the CSS assignment tonight, or whenever you get to it, work on it. But thanks a lot again, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow night for lesson 4. Have a good night, everyone.